What kind of person kicks away a disabled woman's crutches in front of her own neighbors? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud over Maplewood Lane, a tidy suburban street where every lawn was manicured to perfection and every mailbox bore the stamp of HOA approval. Karen Whitaker, the self-appointed queen of the Maplewood Homeowners Association, was that person. At 52, with her blonde bob razor sharp and her clipboard always at the ready, Karen ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in a pastel cardigan. She was the arbiter of fence heights, the enforcer of trash complacement, and the terror of anyone who dared park a car an inch over the line. But this wasn't about a misplaced garbage bin or an unapproved mailbox. This was personal. This was cruel. And this was the moment Karen's reign began to unravel. It started on a crisp September evening, the kind where the air smells faintly of leaves and the streetlights hum to life just as the sun dips below the horizon. My wife, Elena, had been home for only a week after a grueling surgery on her spine. The accident that caused it, a reckless driver swerving into her lane 6 months prior, had left her with a fractured vertebra and a long road to recovery. She was 41, a woman whose quiet strength had always been her hallmark, but now she relied on a wheelchair most days and crutches when she felt strong enough to stand. That evening, she decided to try the crutches, determined to take a short walk to the mailbox at the end of our driveway. It was her first attempt at independence since the hospital, a small act of defiance against the pain that had stolen so much from her. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when I heard the shouting. Elena's voice, sharp but controlled, cut through the window. "Please, just give them back." My heart lurched. I dropped the knife and ran outside, my sneakers skidding on the polished wood floor. There, in the fading light, was Karen, standing over Elena, who was gripping the mailbox for balance. Elena's crutches lay in the dirt, a few feet away, as if they'd been swatted aside like trash. Karen's face was a mask of indignation, her voice dripping with venom. "This is a violation, Elena. You can't just leave your medical equipment cluttering the sidewalk. It's an eyesore." I froze, my blood boiling, but my feet rooted to the ground. Elena's face was pale, her knuckles white as she clung to the mailbox. She wasn't just angry. She was humiliated, her vulnerability exposed for the whole street to see. A few neighbors had poked their heads out, curtains twitching, but no one stepped forward. "Not yet, Karen," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I wasn't leaving them anywhere. I was using them. I need them to walk." Karen scoffed, her laugh like a blade. "Then maybe you shouldn't be out here making a spectacle. This neighborhood has standards, and I'm not going to let you drag it down." She took a step closer, her heels clicking on the pavement, and I saw Elena flinch, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it all. That's when I snapped out of my daze and stormed forward. "Karen, what the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the street. "Those are her crutches. She's recovering from surgery." Karen turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Oh, David, don't start. You know the rules. I've warned you about that unkempt hedge already, and now this? I'm doing my job." Her job. That was always her excuse. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was wielding power, savoring the control she had over Maplewood Lane. She'd been president of the HOA for 7 years, and in that time, she'd turned the neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. Fines for minor infractions, public shaming at meetings, even threats of liens on homes. She thrived on it. But this was a new low, even for her. I knelt to pick up Elena's crutches, my hands shaking with rage. As I handed them to her, I saw the tears she was fighting back, not from sadness but from the indignity of it all. "I'm fine," she whispered, but I could hear the strain in her voice. She took the crutches and steadied herself, her chin lifting in that way she always did when she refused to be broken. "Karen," she said, her tone measured but firm, "you don't get to decide when I need to live my life. Not today, not ever." Karen's lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see about that. You're already on thin ice with the board." She turned on her heel, her clipboard clutched like a shield, and strode back to her house across the street. The neighbors who'd been watching slipped back inside, their doors closing softly, as if they hadn't just witnessed a woman being stripped of her dignity. I wanted to scream after her, to demand an apology, but Elena touched my arm. "Don't," she said. "Not now. Let's go inside." That night, as we sat at the kitchen table, the untouched dinner growing cold, Elena told me something that made my stomach twist. Karen wasn't just the HOA tyrant. She was also the plaintiff in a case Elena had been assigned to preside over as a district judge. A case about a disputed property line, where Karen was suing her neighbor, Tom Grayson, for allegedly encroaching on her land. Elena hadn't connected the dots until that moment. She rarely discussed her cases at home, and Karen's name hadn't come up until now. The irony was almost too much. Karen, who thought she could bully anyone into submission, had no idea she'd just humiliated the one person who held her fate in court. I looked at Elena, expecting her to be as furious as I was, but her expression was calm, almost serene. "She doesn't know," she said softly, "and I'm not going to let her get away with this." There was a fire in her eyes, one I hadn't seen since before the accident. This wasn't just about the Crutches anymore. It was about justice, about standing up to someone who thrived on making others feel small. And Elena, my wife, the woman who'd spent her career upholding fairness, was ready to fight back. Not with anger, but with something far more powerful. The next morning, Maplewood Lane buzzed with whispers. News of Karen's outburst had spread, carried by the neighbors who'd peeked from behind their curtains. By noon, a small group had gathered on Tom Grayson's porch, their voices low but urgent. Tom, a retired mechanic with a kind face weathered by years of hard work, was at the center of it. His property dispute with Karen had been the talk of the neighborhood for months, ever since she'd accused him of building a shed that crossed her property line by a mere 6 inches. The lawsuit was petty, spiteful, and quintessentially Karen. But now, after what she'd done to Elena, the mood had shifted. People weren't just annoyed, they were angry. I watched from our front window as Elena prepared for her day in court. She moved slowly, her crutches clicking softly against the hardwood floor, but there was a determination in her every step. She'd insisted on going to work, refusing to let Karen's cruelty keep her sidelined. "I'm not fragile, David," she'd said when I tried to convince her to take another day to rest. "And I'm not letting her think she won." Her strength was humbling, but it also scared me. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and I knew she'd double down if she felt challenged. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't stay inside any longer. I walked over to Tom's house, where he and 2 other neighbors, Sarah and Miguel, were still talking. Sarah, a single mom who'd clashed with Karen over her son's skateboard ramp, was pacing. "She's gone too far this time," she said, her voice tight. "Kicking Elena's crutches? Who does that?" Miguel, who ran a small landscaping business, nodded grimly. "She fined me $200 last month because my truck was too commercial for the street. But this is evil." Tom leaned back in his chair, his hands folded over his stomach. "You know she's been sniffing around my yard again? Took pictures of my shed yesterday, probably for her precious lawsuit." That's when I told them about Elena's role as the judge in Karen's case. Their jaws dropped, and for a moment, the porch was silent. Then Sarah let out a low whistle. "Oh, this is too good. Karen's got no idea, does she?" I shook my head. "Elena is keeping it professional. She won't let it sway her ruling, but I'm guessing Karen's going to have a rough day in court when she realizes who's on the bench." Miguel grinned, but there was a hardness in his eyes. "She deserves it, but we can't just wait for the courtroom. We need to do something now." That's when the idea took shape, a plan to push back against Karen's tyranny, not just for Elena, but for everyone she'd bullied over the years. Sarah suggested digging into the HOA records. Karen's been running this place like her personal empire, but I bet she's made mistakes. Nobody's that perfect. Tom nodded. "I've heard rumors she's been skimming from the HOA funds. Nothing concrete, but people talk." My pulse quickened. If we could find proof of Karen's misconduct, it wouldn't just humiliate her. It could end her reign for good. We spent the rest of the day strategizing. Miguel knew a guy at the county clerk's office who could pull HOA financial records. Sarah offered to talk to other neighbors, quietly rallying support. I hesitated, knowing Elena would want to keep things above board, but the image of her crutches in the dirt burned in my mind. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Karen had crossed a line, and we were going to make sure she faced the consequences. By evening, Elena returned home, her face drawn but her eyes bright. She didn't talk much about court, but she mentioned Karen's case briefly. "It's scheduled for tomorrow," she said, setting her crutches against the wall. "She's representing herself, which is bold." I could tell she was holding back, keeping her judge's impartiality intact, but there was a flicker of something else, anticipation, maybe. I didn't press her. Instead, I told her about the neighbor's plan. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable, then said, "Be careful, David. Karen's not stupid. If she catches wind of this, she'll fight dirty." That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something big. Karen had ruled Maplewood Lane through fear, but fear only works until people stop being afraid. And we weren't afraid anymore. The next morning, as Elena left for court, I joined Sarah and Miguel at Tom's again. Miguel's contact had come through with a stack of HOA financial records, and what we found was staggering. Over the past 3 years, Karen had authorized dozens of miscellaneous expenses, thousands of dollars unaccounted for, funneled to vague vendors with no receipts. It wasn't proof of theft, not yet, but it was enough to raise questions. Serious ones. Sarah's eyes gleamed as she scanned the documents. "This could ruin her," she whispered. "If we take this to the HOA board, she's done." But Tom shook his head. "We need more. Karen's got the board in her pocket. We need something they can't ignore." That's when Miguel suggested going public, not just to the board, but to the whole neighborhood. A meeting, a confrontation, where everyone could see Karen for what she was. It was risky, but it felt right. We set a date, 3 days from now, at the community center. We'd call an emergency HOA meeting and lay everything bare. As we planned, I couldn't help but think of Elena, sitting on the bench that very moment, listening to Karen argue her case. I wondered if Karen had noticed her yet, if she'd made the connection. Part of me hoped she hadn't. Not yet. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her actions when the truth hit. But another part of me, the part that loved Elena fiercely, wanted to protect her from whatever Karen might do next. Because Elena was right. Karen fought dirty, and we were about to poke a hornet's nest. The courtroom was a world apart from Maplewood Lane, all polished wood and hushed voices, but the tension was just as thick. Elena sat on the bench, her black robe a stark contrast to the crutches leaning against the wall behind her. She'd insisted on using them to walk into the courtroom that morning, a quiet act of defiance that made my chest ache with pride. Karen, meanwhile, stood at the plaintiff's table, her posture rigid, her voice clipped as she presented her case against Tom. She had no lawyer, just her clipboard and a stack of meticulously organized documents. She spoke with the same authority she used to terrorize the neighborhood, as if the courtroom were just another HOA meeting she could dominate. Elena listened, her face a mask of professionalism, but I could see the strain in her eyes. She hadn't told Karen who she was, not yet. The case was straightforward. Karen claimed Tom's shed encroached on her property, citing surveys and HOA bylaws. Tom, represented by a weary-looking public defender, argued the shed had been there for years, predating Karen's ownership. The evidence was murky, the kind of petty dispute that could drag on for months. But Karen's arrogance was her downfall. She spoke over the defender, interrupted the bailiff, and, at one point, even lectured Elena on property law. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her tone anything but respectful, "I've been managing this neighborhood for years. I know the rules better than anyone." Elena's voice was calm but cutting. "Ms. Whitaker, you'll address the court appropriately or be held in contempt." The words landed like a gavel, and for the first time, Karen faltered. I wasn't there. I heard it all later from Elena, but I could imagine the moment. Karen's eyes narrowing, searching Elena's face, maybe starting to piece it together. But she didn't. Not yet. She was too caught up in her own narrative, too sure of her invincibility. Back on Maplewood Lane, our plan was gaining momentum. Sarah had rallied more neighbors, including Mrs. Patel, an elderly widow who'd once been fined by Karen for planting unauthorized roses. Mrs. Patel's anger was quiet but fierce, and she brought a folder of her own, letters from Karen, each one more condescending than the last. She told me my roses were a visual nuisance, Mrs. Patel said, her hands trembling. I planted them for my husband after he passed. She didn't care. The stories poured out. Miguel's fine, Sarah's ramp, Tom's shed, and countless others. Karen's reign wasn't just strict. It was personal, a crusade to bend everyone to her will. Then came the twist that turned our anger into something sharper. Miguel's contact at the county clerk's office called late that afternoon with a bombshell. Karen's miscellaneous expenses weren't just sloppy bookkeeping. One of the vendors she'd paid, a landscaping company called Green Vista, didn't exist. The address was a vacant lot, the phone number disconnected. But the payments, totaling over $10,000, had been wired to an account linked to Karen's cousin, a man named Roger Whitaker, who lived 2 towns over. It wasn't just negligence. It was fraud. The discovery hit us like a thunderclap. Sarah clutched the phone, her face pale. "She's been stealing from us," she whispered. "All those fines, all those rules, and she's been pocketing our money." Tom slammed his fist on the table. "We got her. This is it." But I felt a chill. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a criminal, and criminals don't go down quietly. We agreed to keep the evidence under wraps until the HOA meeting, but the weight of it changed everything. This wasn't just about Elena's crutches anymore. It was about exposing a predator who'd preyed on her own community. That evening, Elena came home exhausted but composed. She didn't talk about the courtroom, but I could tell it had taken a toll. I told her about the Green Vista discovery, expecting her to be as shocked as we were. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if she'd suspected something like this all along. "She's desperate," Elena said. "People like Karen don't act this way unless they're protecting something, or hiding it." She paused, then added, "Tomorrow's the final day of her case. I'll have to rule soon." I wanted to ask what she'd do, whether she'd recuse herself given what Karen had done to her. But I knew better. Elena's integrity was ironclad. She'd never let personal bias sway her judgment. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what Karen would do when she realized who was holding the gavel. Would she lash out, double down, or would she finally see the consequences of her actions? I didn't know, but the thought kept me awake long after Elena had fallen asleep, her crutches propped against the nightstand like silent sentinels. The next day, as Elena headed to court, we finalized plans for the HOA meeting. Sarah printed flyers, keeping them vague but urgent. Emergency HOA meeting. Demand accountability. Miguel and I went door to door, talking to neighbors, collecting more stories. By evening, we had over 20 people committed to showing up. The community center would be packed, and Karen wouldn't know what hit her. But as we worked, a sense of unease grew. Karen wasn't at home. Her car was gone, her blinds drawn. It was unlike her to miss a chance to patrol the neighborhood. Was she preparing for court, or had she somehow caught wind of our plan? The courtroom was a pressure cooker by the time Karen's case reached its climax. Elena sat on the bench, her face a study in calm authority, but I knew the toll it was taking. She'd barely slept, her mind wrestling with the weight of the case and the memory of Karen's cruelty. Karen, oblivious to the storm brewing, was in rare form, her voice sharp as she cross-examined Tom's lawyer. "This isn't about a shed," she snapped, waving a survey map like a weapon. "It's about respect for boundaries, for rules, for the community I've worked so hard to maintain." The irony was thick enough to choke on, but Elena's expression didn't flicker. She was a judge first, a victim second. Then it happened. Karen, in a moment of overconfidence, turned to Elena and said, "Your Honor, you must understand how important it is to uphold standards. People like Mr. Grayson think they can do whatever they want," just like she stopped, her eyes narrowing as she finally looked at Elena, really looked at her. The crutches behind the bench, the familiar face, the quiet strength. The realization hit like a freight train. "You," Karen whispered, her voice barely audible. The courtroom went silent, every head turning to her. Elena raised an eyebrow, her tone cool. "Is there a problem, Ms. Whitaker?" Karen's face flushed crimson, her hands trembling as she gripped her clipboard. "You're the woman from Maplewood Lane, the one with the crutches." A murmur rippled through the room, but Elena's voice cut through it like a blade. "This court is concerned with the facts of the case, Ms. Whitaker, not personal matters. Do you have anything relevant to add?" Karen stammered, her composure unraveling. She tried to pivot, to refocus on her argument, but the damage was done. She'd seen the truth, and it had shaken her to her core. Back on Maplewood Lane, our plan was in full swing. The community center was booked, the flyers distributed, and the evidence against Karen neatly compiled. Sarah had created a timeline of the suspicious payments, complete with bank records and the non-existent Green Vistas details. Miguel had rallied more neighbors, including a young couple who'd been fined for their dogs barking. The momentum was unstoppable, but so was the tension. Karen's absence from the neighborhood felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a furious text from her, but there was nothing. That afternoon, as I helped Sarah staple flyers to the community board, a car pulled up. It was Karen's cousin, Roger, the one linked to the Green Vista account. He was a wiry man in his 40s, with a nervous energy that set my nerves on edge. "Heard you're stirring up trouble," he said, his voice low. Karen's not happy. I square my shoulders, trying to match Elena's calm. "We're just asking questions, Roger. Like why 10 grand of HOA money went to a fake company." His eyes widened, just for a second, before he masked it with a sneer. "Careful, David. You don't know what you're messing with." He drove off, leaving me with a sinking feeling. Karen wasn't just fighting for her reputation. She was fighting for her freedom. That evening, Elena came home, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. "She knows," she said simply, setting her crutches aside. "She figured it out in court today." I waited, my heart pounding, but she shook her head. I didn't recuse myself. The case is too far along, and I'm not letting her intimidate me out of doing my job. She paused, then added, "She's scared, David. I could see it. She's not as untouchable as she thinks." I told her about Roger's visit, and her expression darkened. "They're circling the wagons," she said. "Be careful at that meeting. She'll come ready to fight." The night before the HOA meeting, we gathered at Tom's house to finalize our strategy. Sarah had printed copies of the financial records, and Miguel had drafted a speech to present them. Mrs. Patel insisted on speaking, too, her voice steady as she recounted Karen's cruelty over the years. The room was electric with purpose, but I couldn't shake the image of Roger's warning. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. As we left Tom's, I glanced at Karen's house. Her car was back, the lights on, but the blinds were still drawn. She was planning something, I was sure of it. The community center was packed, the air thick with anticipation and the faint smell of coffee from a pot someone had brewed. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, their faces a mix of curiosity, anger, and fear. Karen hadn't shown up yet, but her presence loomed like a shadow. I stood near the front with Sarah, Miguel, and Tom, our evidence stacked neatly on a table. The financial records, the letters, the stories, they were our weapons, and tonight we'd use them to dismantle Karen's empire. But as the clock ticked closer to 7, my stomach churned. Something felt off. Sarah took the microphone first, her voice steady but fierce. "We're here because we're tired of living under a dictator," she said, and a murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. She laid out the case, Karen's fines, her threats, her cruelty to Elena. Then Miguel stepped up, holding the Green Vista documents. "This isn't just about rules," he said. "It's about theft. Karen's been taking our money, funneling it to a fake company run by her cousin." The room erupted in gasps and angry whispers. Mrs. Patel spoke next, her voice trembling with emotion as she told the story of her roses. One by one, neighbors stood, sharing their own encounters with Karen's tyranny. The momentum was building, unstoppable. Then the door swung open, and Karen strode in. She was dressed impeccably, her blonde bob gleaming under the fluorescent lights, but her eyes were wild, like a cornered animal's. She didn't wait for an invitation. She marched to the front, snatching the microphone from Miguel. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. "You think you can smear me with lies? I've given everything to this neighborhood, and this is how you repay me." She pointed at me, her finger trembling. "You, David, and your wife. She's the one behind this, isn't she? The judge who thinks she can ruin me." The room went silent, every eye on me. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "This isn't about Elena. It's about you, Karen. About the money you stole, the people you've hurt." I held up the Green Vista documents, and the crowd leaned forward, hungry for the truth. Karen's face paled, but she didn't back down. "Those are fabricated," she snapped. "You have no proof." "But we did." Miguel projected the bank records on the wall, showing the transfers to Roger's account. The crowd's anger boiled over, shouts of "thief" and "resign" filling the air. Karen's composure cracked. She screamed over the noise, accusing us of jealousy, of sabotage. But the evidence was undeniable, and the neighbors weren't buying her excuses. Then came the final blow. Tom stood, his voice calm but devastating. "I got a call from the county today," he said. "They're auditing the HOA's books because of an anonymous tip. Karen, they know about Green Vista." The room exploded, and Karen's face went white. She staggered back, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, but there was no escaping it. Her empire was crumbling. That night, as we left the community center, the neighbors were buzzing with plans to elect a new HOA president. Karen had fled, her car peeling out of the parking lot, but her downfall was sealed. The audit would expose everything, and the neighborhood would finally be free. But when I got home, Elena was waiting, her face grave. "She tried to file a complaint against me today," she said. "Claimed I was biased because of the Crutches incident. It won't go anywhere. The court dismissed it, but she's not done fighting." I pulled her close, feeling the weight of it all. Karen was down, but not out. Not yet. The fallout was swift and brutal. By morning, the county had frozen the HOA's accounts, and Karen's name was plastered across local news sites. "Maplewood HOA president accused of fraud." The headline screamed, alongside grainy photos of her striding into court. The neighbors were relentless, sharing stories online and in group chats, their anger now laced with triumph. Karen's house sat dark, her car gone. Rumor had it she'd left town, staying with Roger while the audit loomed. But I knew better than to think she'd vanish quietly. People like Karen don't just disappear, they regroup. Elena, meanwhile, was preparing her ruling on the property dispute. She'd spent hours reviewing the case, her commitment to fairness unshaken despite Karen's attempt to discredit her. "It's not about revenge," she told me one evening, her crutches clicking as she paced the living room. "It's about doing what's right." I admired her restraint, but part of me wanted her to throw the book at Karen to make her feel the weight of her actions. Still, I trusted Elena's judgment. She'd always been the better half of us, the one who saw justice as a beacon, not a weapon. The audit's preliminary findings came 2 days later, and they were damning. Over $15,000 had been siphoned from the HOA over 3 years, funneled through Green Vista and other shell companies. Roger was named as a co-conspirator, and the district attorney was considering charges. The neighborhood was electric with vindication, but also with questions. How had Karen gotten away with it for so long? Why hadn't anyone spoken up sooner? The answers were uncomfortable. Fear, apathy, the slow erosion of community under her rule. We'd all played a part in letting her rise. Sarah took the lead in rebuilding. She organized a new HOA election, nominating Tom as president. He was reluctant but agreed, his quiet decency a stark contrast to Karen's tyranny. Mrs. Patel volunteered to oversee the finances, her meticulous nature perfect for the job. Slowly, Maplewood Lane began to heal. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years waved to each other, their fences no longer battle lines. Elena's crutches, once a symbol of her vulnerability, became a badge of her resilience. She walked a little more each day, her strength returning with every step. But Karen wasn't done. A week after the audit's findings, she sent a letter to every household, a rambling defense of her actions. She claimed the money was for community improvements, that we'd misunderstood her intentions. She even had the gall to mention Elena, accusing her of orchestrating a personal vendetta. It was a desperate move, and it backfired spectacularly. The neighbors, now united, tore the letter apart online, mocking its lies. Karen's credibility was gone, her power shattered. Elena's ruling came the next day. She found in favor of Tom, dismissing Karen's claim as baseless. The shed, she ruled, was within Tom's property line, supported by an older survey Karen had conveniently ignored. The decision was a small victory, but it carried weight. Karen had lost not just her case, but her grip on the neighborhood. Elena never mentioned the Crutches incident in her ruling. Her integrity wouldn't allow it, but I knew it was there, a quiet undercurrent of justice. Spring came to Maplewood Lane, and with it, a sense of renewal. The roses in Mrs. Patel's garden bloomed brighter than ever, a quiet defiance against Karen's long-gone rules. Tom, now HOA president, held meetings that felt more like neighborhood barbecues, with laughter and shared stories replacing Karen's lectures. The audit had concluded, and charges were filed against Karen and Roger for embezzlement. They'd fled to another state, but the law was closing in. Their absence felt like a weight lifted, but also a reminder. Power, unchecked, could corrupt even the smallest corners of a community. Elena was walking without crutches now, her recovery a testament to her stubborn will. She never spoke about Karen's case again, but I saw the change in her. The incident had tested her, not just as a judge, but as a person, and she'd emerged stronger. One evening, as we sat on our porch, watching kids ride bikes down the street, she took my hand. "We did this together," she said. "Not just us, but everyone. We took our home back." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that justice wasn't just in courtrooms. It was in the courage to stand up, to speak out, to rebuild. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. Old grudges lingered, and new challenges would come. But we were learning, slowly, to listen to each other, to choose kindness over control. Karen's downfall wasn't just her punishment. It was our liberation. We'd been complicit in her rise, too afraid or too busy to question her. Now, we were awake, and Maplewood Lane was ours again. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold, I thought of the crutches in the dirt, the moment that had sparked it all. They weren't just tools for Elena. They were a symbol of what we'd overcome. Karen had tried to break us, but she'd only made us stronger. And in that strength, we found something worth fighting for. A community built on trust, not fear. A home worth protecting.